Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's good to see you. All right, so welcome to the July edition of our TSC, which is open to everyone, and it's good to have you on the call. So we have an efficient agenda, elegantly simple agenda today. Please keep in mind that our calls are recorded, as you already know. Here's our current list of TSC voting members. We do most of our governance and voting in Slack. So please, if you haven't already, we'd love to have you in Slack as well. Speaking of our communication channels, yeah, the wiki needs an update, but it is a good source for meeting notes. We've got recordings of meetings on our YouTube channel. We have a LinkedIn group. We have a dormant Mastodon account, which, does anybody want to take that on? We have a mailing list as well. You might have noticed the newsletter when it went out at the end of last month, got sent to that as well. But Slack is where we do most of our governance, I would say. All right, before we get into our agenda for the month, would you mind if we did a quick round of intros? If you could just share your name and what brings you to our meeting today, that would be great. I'll start at the top of my meeting list. Let's see here. So that puts Mache on the spot.
Hey, I'm Maciej, and today I want to discuss integration certification spec, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. Next, Julian.
I am Julian. I'm a principal engineer at Datadog, and I'm the project lead for OpenLineage for the LFAI. I'm also interested in the integration and certification progress.
Thank you. Minkyu?
Hi, I'm Minkyu and software engineer at Moloko and also a committer of the OpenLineage too. And I'm just here to catch up the progress of the project.
Thank you. Mark?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
My name is Mark Soul. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm doing a talk on effective real-time data lineage at Kafka Current this year. And OpenLineage will be included as part of my presentation. And so I'm just here to learn and listen.
Well, thanks for letting us know about that. Let's get in touch offline about that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Jens.
Hey there, I'm Jens. I'm with Google, an engineering manager, leading a team that's building Lineage capability for BigQuery and Dataplex for data governance use cases. And I'm also here today to discuss the certification process proposal. Good to be here.
Thank you. Jakub.
Hello everyone, I'm Jakub. I'm product manager at Manta/IBM. I used to attend these meetings a long time ago, and I resumed last month, so I'm still catching up.
Great, thank you. Harel?
Hi everyone, my name is Harel. I'm an engineering manager at Datadog. And OpenLineage committer. Also, I have a friend with me here today from Datadog too.
Hi, I'm Gibo Choa. I'm also an engineering manager here at Datadog, but been following the project for a while now. And yeah, just looking forward to progress updates and getting involved.
And I'm not here for this certification process, just for shits and giggles.
Yeah, needless to say. Thank you. Sheeri.
Hi, I'm Sheeri Cabral. I'm a product manager at Calibra for Lineage from ETL Tools. I am here for the certification process proposal, but I also come most months because I am interested in a world where OpenLineage is a standard, and consumers like Calibra don't have to do all this work to reverse engineer what everybody's XML or whatever looks like. We can just focus on actual features.
Yeah. We speak the same language, and that's the whole idea also. Right. Right. Thanks, Eric.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. Hope your summer's been off to a good start. I'm Eric Veliver calling in from Providence, Rhode Island, from the Atlan team. So excited to be here again. One specific call out, I have some colleagues that are giving a talk on OpenLineage this weekend on Saturday called Ensuring Data Quality with Data Contracts in OpenLineage. And I'll share that link in the chat.
Awesome. That'd be great to have. Thank you. Good to have you. Mohan, if I'm not mingling your name.
Hey, hey guys. This is Mohan. I work at Sketchers as a data engineer, based out of Washington. So I'm here for the first time. I just wanted to see and understand what OpenLineage has to offer, and the certification process proposal as well, just to get things learning. And we started introducing OpenLineage into our environment. So I just wanted to pick up things from here.
Wow, that's exciting. Thank you for joining. Great to have you. And everyone, of course.
Yeah, likewise.
Last but not least, excuse me, Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm a product manager with Alteryx. It's a no-code ETL tool, and we've recently started looking into OpenLineage as, possibly becoming a future lineage producer, and utilizing the OpenLineage spec, because kind of addressing a pain point that Sheeri mentioned, we don't want to output lineage in an Alteryx format. We want to make it easier for the lineage consumers that we would be working with. Good to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you. Exciting to hear that you want to join the ecosystem. That's really great to know. I think you're in the right place to learn more and get started. I hope I didn't miss anybody. That the list continually updates when someone new speaks. So if I did miss anyone, I apologize. Please speak up. Anyway, first on our agenda and some announcements. I just have one for us. It's an event, and it's great to know that we have more events upcoming in the community than I knew about, but I wanted to put this one on your radar and wish the speaker good luck. So this one will happen in 2 days at the 5th Elephant Conference. It's called Ensuring Data Quality Using Contracts. And wait, we've heard about this one already, right? During the intros. Okay.
Same event.
Same event.
That's the event.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, great to know about this anyway. And on to some recent release news. So I just have one. I've also got a brief kind of preview of what's coming up in 1.18. So that release, 1.18, is expected very soon. Hopefully, crossing fingers, this week. I probably just jinxed it and it won't happen. But that's the plan. So anyway, since our last meeting, we released 1.17.1. Thanks to all the contributors. This does not include the fixes, but there were a whole bunch as always, including a fix to ColumnLineage in Spark. So if that was breaking your lineage, that's been fixed. Yeah, I don't want to read the notes to you, but I did want to just highlight a couple things. In this release, we implemented in this release our facet registry, which is really exciting. A key resource for onboarding new partners. We have Harel to thank for this, and wanted to shout out our GCP partners for contributing our first facet to the registry. So check that out. It's in the spec, in the repo.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia, for being a trailblazer and you know, making the first official custom facet in the registry, and to many more.
So I mentioned, yeah, some stuff that's coming up. You want to keep an eye out for a key fix. I believe this is in the Java client. Does that seem right? And I think this was the motivation for the request that we got for this release. Some other changes coming. A big improvement in the experience of Spark, and a number of new extractors, type masking from Tomash, Spark Lineage CLI verifier. There are a few more. Can check them out on main in the OpenLineage repo. Okay, so the topic we've all been waiting for. Who wants to kick off the discussion?
I can do that. Let me just get the document up and shared. There we go. And shared. So this document is a proposal for an integration certification process. And the idea is, so it starts with two distinct cases, but I think we actually added a few other ones. So consumers, I'll start with the shortest ones. Consumers want to verify that they understand metadata correctly and need examples of all facets. So for example, if Colibra is a consumer, we want to make sure that we are using everything properly, and that if there's a facet we're not using, we just ignore it as opposed to run an error. A producer, right, like Ellen, if Alteryx wants to produce metadata, they want to make sure that the metadata they're producing works, it's good. Now, we did add a little nuance here. So there's the integration itself. For example, there could be like the Spark integration, and then there could be the producer of the facet itself. So it can be different. It can be the same, but sometimes it's different. So the example is in Airflow, each operator can be its own facet producer, right? So a Python, operator might produce a ColumnLineage facet, and also a Java operator can produce a ColumnLineage facet. So we would need tests not just for Airflow ColumnLineage, but for each operator that can produce that facet. We added a few extra kind of purposes here, because there are actually purposes not just for producers and consumers, but for the OpenLineage, the technical steering committee or committers or whatever you want to call it. Folks who are updating the spec want to make sure that it's going to work. If they want to validate that it's backwards compatible, right? They could do that with this. And so we actually have some producer detailed use cases consumer detailed use cases, and then as an OpenLineage user. So somebody might not be a producer or consumer, but as someone who just uses it, they might want to say, I have this producer and this consumer. Do they work together? That's the basic idea there. And then the use cases for a contributor/administrator, who might want to see which consumers and producers are compliant with the spec. I think we might have duplicated this. Want to be able to easily see which consumers and producers are compliant. Oh, with a current spec or with a new spec, right? So if there's a new spec coming down the pike, you want to be able to see if it's backwards compatible. And then wanting to see who in a company is responsible for the spec compliance. So for example, if Alteryx or Calibra is, failing some of the specs, they want to contact us and say, hey, you want to fix this probably. So I'm not going to read every line of this because I don't think we need to. I think their access to the doc can be given if we need to, but we have done a lot of discussion since Julian created it back in October. And so we're just kind of,
Just currently the doc is set up so anyone can comment on it. So, feel free to comment on the doc. It's linked in the issue number 2163. And once the doc is more stable, I guess we'll update the ticket and that become like it will be checked in the repo.
Yeah, let's put a GitHub link into the document so we can go back and forth. You know what, I will go very briefly over it since we do have a little bit of time. So producers want to make sure that what they're producing works, right, is valid. They want a clear understanding of where they deviate from the spec. So for example, if there's a custom facet that they're using, but also, that's where it's expanded. So they've added a custom facet, right, that's not in core. And then where they deviate from the spec. So for example, maybe it's something that doesn't do ColumnLineage, right? So they would just take it and not use it. And that's a clear understanding there. Producer wants to know that. And want to be able to have different sets of tests to accommodate different outputs. And then a user might want to be able to test against specific files produced without publishing the results for evaluation purposes, right? So as a user, I might want to say, hey, I have these files from a producer. Will it work for me? As a consumer, consumers want to understand what can be consumed without having an error, and also which facets or versions will return an error, so that they can know what their expectations are and send that to their customers or their internal users. They want to be notified when a change to the spec or facets happen that they would return the error for. So we already discussed, right, that the administrators want to know who to contact. We want to be notified when a specific producer makes a change that is syntactically backwards compatible, but semantically backwards compatible. I'm not sure if that was but or and, or if there's a missing negation there. We did a lot of discussion about syntax. So when this proposal started, it seemed to be something where test was just run and they would run against, live APIs to either get produced data and test it or consume data that was produced. I don't know if I said the same thing twice, but it's kind of evolved since then. There are producers that don't produce via API, right? Like Snowflake is one of them where you kind of run a query and you run it. And so that's, there's a little different. We divulged a little from the beginning and we talked about syntax versus semantics here. Now we did have a discussion recently about syntax versus semantics. And I think we agreed that we're going to keep semantic in here. That's kind of what I wanted to look at right now. Consumers might want to be able to test consumption without publishing the results, right? To have like a test harness that they can download and run it and change things and not have it necessarily be like every run being public. So they want to understand how robust the coverage is, right? If I have 5 jobs and 3 give column level lineage, You wouldn't just want 3 out of 5 jobs to show up, because then it looks like it's only 60% complete when really it was 100% complete. So there are 4 different cases here. Something expected to be unsupported and it is unsupported. Something that is expected to be supported and is not supported at all. Something that's expected to be supported. Oops, wait a minute. This should be 2 out of 5 jobs. So the idea is that, no, 0 out of 5. Is there, oh, there's, okay, I put this here. So there's fully unsupported, fully supported, and then partially supported. So this should kind of be like a warning. And then for users, they want to understand, let's see, consumer use case number 1, but applicable to users. Yes, so it's understand consuming, if a consumer is compatible with the OpenLineage I'm producing. They want to see if the information will be used, right? So a consumer producer may not, or a consumer specifically may not use the information you gave it and not have an error. And so you want to know that. So for example, run ID doesn't cause an error, but it's unused, or is the SQL code used anywhere by the consumer? Where is it displayed? That kind of a thing. They want to see where the information will be used. So this was kind of newer to the discussion. So as a user, who says, oh, I want to use, let's say Calibra as a consumer, I want to use Calibra. Where is it gonna show up, if at all, right? And so someone like me from Calibra would have to make a mapping to say, oh, like job.name, oh, that's part of the unique identifier of the transformation code, or SQL query, it appears in the transformations window in Calibra, that kind of a thing. This is a very manual thing, and obviously we would have to trust that the consumers are giving you the accurate mapping. But I think that because this is open source, if somebody looked at a consumer and it said this was mapped and it is mapped to here and it's not, then I think it's easily fixable with a PR. And if there's a not mapped field. So something like this, which is more human readable, to say, hey, this is where I would find it. Versus, if the SQL query is not mapped at all and my requirements are that I can drill down to see the SQL query, then that whatever tool did that might not be the right one for me. So wanting to have this information easily accessible in human readable form on OpenLineage.io or GitHub, right? So in an independent place, not just, Calibra's website says, oh, we're compatible. And want to be able to privately evaluate producer and consumer combinations. So I don't think we need to go through all of this. Does anybody have any use cases that aren't covered here?
I guess my question would be, like what's the granularity, or like this is certification for individual integrations. So let's say if Calibra was a producer, Calibra can produce Lineage for multiple different technologies. So would you certify each one of them individually, or just one certification for Calibra?
That's a great question. I think it would be individually, right? You would want to certify a Calibra Airflow integration separately from a Calibra AWS Glue integration.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, mostly because we don't know if they're the same integration or different, right? OpenLineage is supposed to be a standard, so it could be, but if there are different products, then we don't know. So I think that would also be up to the consumers or even the producers, right, to figure out it's a separate integration test, right, versus operator test. And on the consumer side, what's a separate, producer, consumption test, I guess. I did want to go through the threads that we haven't resolved yet. I feel like in this thread we're all agreeing about syntax versus semantics.
Sheeri, maybe we can leave this one open. There's a bit of content in there that we can use when we go into implementation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think we might want to put that down into the proposed implementation and then resolve the top part.
We can do that as well.
Yeah, I won't do
Yeah, I
that
think-
here.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to summarize, put that in a section somewhere and resolve the thread. Yeah.
Right. Wanting to get a clear picture of the compatibility status. So Masi, as you were, so we were talking about the compatibility status, and you were mentioning that compatibility for version, say, 1.2 means that, you know, if a consumer has, or 1.1 means that if a consumer has 1.2, it will work. But I don't think it's for every consumer. I think it's for a given one, right? This is the idea of, I have these versions. This is it compatible? And I think that that can be done.
I think our expectations as a producer, like producer author and like spec developer who adds some fields to the spec, is that when I add a new field and fill it with something, it won't cause a crash in somebody else's external system. So what we are really trying to do is not to remove them, of course, but pure, maybe the only expectation I would say from producer point of view is that adding something doesn't break stuff. And also this means like custom facets, which are in the OpenLineage from the beginning, shouldn't break anything because they are like custom, right? So customer can add something. And it's also like can be also unexpected data for some given consumer. So I think this expectation is like pretty much baked into OpenLineage from the beginning.
Okay, so it might just be an obvious use case.
I think, Maciek, isn't that covered under like one of those as an OpenLineage contributor use cases? Because I think you were speaking as a contributor now, right?
Yes, basically as someone who writes producers, right, rather than consumers.
Right.
Right.
Because the statements I added here were specifically about documenting the certification or compatibility level, or what we might want to call it.
Right.
Sure.
Like, let's say I
Okay.
work for a company, you know, let's say I work for, you know, Skechers, like our friend earlier was, you know, introduced himself, right? And I'm a developer and I want to know, is, you know, Calibra's OpenLineage integration going to work with Alteryx's whatever, right? I want to make sure that, or will my Spark, you know, my custom code that I wrote in Python, will that be compatible with, you know, Calibra? And so that's what this is getting at, right? That I might have a specific integration version, and this is giving me a thumbs up.
Yeah, in specific integration version, sure. Just thinking about this particular.
Yes. So yeah, we do have that here. So I will resolve this and accept this suggestion here. Because I don't think it's somewhat of a duplicate, but it's a different persona. So let's see, what else do we have open here? So now we're getting into the implementation of it. So there are examples of all the core facets. It's not perfect. Although I will say, I actually look at the tests often rather than reading the spec itself, because for me, it's easier to see, you know, if I'm looking at ColumnLineage, it's kind of easier to see, oh, this is where fields go, as opposed to all of the kind of descriptions and type and whatever, especially since type is already in there. And so for me, it's a little, I'm not perfect at reading JSON specs. So I do love the examples. So there are usually minimal examples that can be used by consumers to validate implementation. Producers could use JSON schemas to validate the metadata they produce. But of course, none of this does anything about semantics, just syntax, meaning if X is required, do you have X? And so, you know, there are some assumptions, right? So we validate the consumer accepts valid OpenLineage events, syntax validation only, right? So what makes a valid OpenLineage event is syntax, meaning that, for example, if you look at something like ColumnLineage, that facet might not be something that a consumer can do or that a producer can produce. That doesn't mean that it's not a valid OpenLineage event, because you can have a valid OpenLineage event without the custom lineage facet. It's very hard to have a valid OpenLineage event. And I don't know if event is being used in a specific way here. When I think about an event, what I think about is something that makes lineage, which means that you would have an input, an output, and maybe a transformation if it's blank, right? So those were kind of the only required things. But obviously the spec has a lot of things that are required, not required. So
yeah, something like time, right, is required also.
Right.
Because,
and status in a run event.
Yes. Yes, in absence of anything else, like ordering by time is pretty good marker of when things happened, right?
Right, and grouping by run ID, right? So if you have a run event, it needs a run ID. So there are required important information. So we would assume a folder that has test scenarios, each containing a list of events with the facets and an MD file to explain the semantics of the events, right? So I have lineage going from table A to table B, right? Maybe it's column one in the same one, and you know, any semantics of the events themselves. A folder that contains the consumer test environment configuration, so the test environment itself, right? So what OpenLineage transport to use? Are we using, you know, HTTP? Is it an API call? What are the parameters for the transport? The GitHub action runner configuration, and the list of emails to notify for regressions. This is an automated type of test. This would be testing syntax, probably syntax only, and it would only be for the consumers that, well, it could also test semantics, but it would only be for the consumers that have live test environments that you can run against. A folder that contains the consumer validation reports, so one report per OpenLineage release per consumer. And so this is the output, right? So this is the how to connect, and then this folder would be the output of the reports of the tests. Then there would be test code that reads the configuration, iterates the test scenarios, right? Sends it to all of them and records the response codes. And is only executed by a dedicated GitHub team to prevent misuse, right? You don't want someone sending 100 different test environments to denial of service your attack, to denial of service attack your infrastructure. We also wanted to be forked and run locally by a consumer vendor, something like a test harness, where it can be run not just by the OpenLineage team, but it can be run at any time by the vendor itself. A GitHub workflow template, which is what would make that go. So a trigger would be a pull request on a core spec or core facets or folder with test scenarios, and that would run the tests with the notification. And then every release, there would also be a test flow there, a testing thing there. We don't really have a lot yet with producers. We were talking about how consumers would test their code. But I think with producers, there's an easier mechanism, right, Julianne? Or
yes and no. So what you want to really test maybe for is like test something before it breaks. And it's not very easy to automate that, right? It's I think possible, yes, maybe easier to test releases, right? That has happened.
Yeah, I wonder if producers might be able to contribute to the actual test cases, right? The test scenarios.
So they could provide example as producers, right? One way to do this, they could provide a bunch of examples. and possibly there'd be some semantics of writing a test. So you could easily use those examples to test against a consumer.
Right. Or if you're a producer, giving the examples is what you're producing.
Yeah.
And so if you have an example and your example changes because you've changed the way you're producing something, you can update the test scenario.
Yes, yes. And I think that's a way to decouple a bit testing the producers from the consumers, right? We won't be able to do the matrix of testing every producer against every consumer. So
Right.
this is one way to decouple this a bit and do continuous integration when someone changes something, right? But it requires a bit of good practice of always updating those, right? And have tests depending on them.
Yes. And so a producer that wants to run tests more often can fork and run kind of the test harness locally. Great. Any questions or comments before we go through? I think there's only 2 comments here in this in the proposed implementation. So anything to add to this before we go through the comments? Okay, great. So the first comment here is in testing the code. And this is where we talked about syntax validation. So my comment here about the misusing the system has been addressed by is only executable by a dedicated GitHub team. And so we talked about how to test semantically. And we were talking about having some kind of a YAML or JSON config file where you could put in, you know, what is just the mapping of the, you know, the facets and where they're mapped to. So
I think Jens had a good idea somewhere else to have like an interface, but I would generalize it. So I think in terms of semantics, we should think of semantics, what our OpenLineage are trying to tell, right? Versus rather prescribing that the consumer has to replicate this in their own environment, right? So we can say like this test is trying to convey that we have a column level lineage between those 2 tables. And consumer should be able to say, yeah, I don't care, right? I don't care about column level lineage. We don't force somebody to implement column level lineage. And I think so, but this should be described, right? So the response for this test, I would say from this consumer would be, I don't care. And other system could declare that I care and I am able to replicate it. And this will be the answer. So this should it be, I think, implemented in a way that allows consumer to describe their response to the particular scenario, and then whether it's executed, its execution matches to the expectation, rather to define some global level mapping that should be valid for all the cases. And that's my idea, at least.
Okay, so the semantic explanation would include the expectation of the response, right? Whether this was kind of what we discussed a little bit before with if something is expected to be unsupported and is unsupported versus expected to be supported but it's unsupported, right? That these are the expectations versus the actual. So the semantic explanation would include the expectation of the response. It would also include the mapping of facets to the consumer application.
Yes, like facets, rather than facets, basically the data transfer event type, like series of events, right? Where series of events can be one event. I think there were other discussion about like different types of compatibility, right? Whether like one event with some specific data, with a specific data versus series of events describing some more complex situation. But I think it's one and the same, right? As Jens pointed, that we can describe some situation with one event, maybe some others with multiple events, but it doesn't really matter, right? We have those events, we send them. It can be one event, one can be multiple events. There can be some facet set. But what it should be describing is some particular scenario that should be described in like natural language for the consumer.
Okay.
So I think my intention was here to get an automated, a formally described way on the semantics, so we can automatically validate whether the consumer did interpret the events correctly from our semantics perspective. And that's why I proposed this interface, so that we have a means of checking back with the consumer. Did you receive the events in the ways that they were intended to? And so I'm wondering whether your proposal, because you also mentioned an interface, so I'm wondering whether you are like, how does your proposal differ? I'm not catching that yet.
The difference is that your proposal like requires the system to actually retain some of this information, and I said this is up to the consumer, right? What they do with this information, and they might receive the facet and drop it, right? Because they don't care, because I don't know, their system doesn't care about column level init, for example, and that should be of course documented, and but the response defined in that way should be valid. So if you're like, your interface proposed that given some two tables, what is there the connection between them, right? Or like fields. And I think it should be also a valid situation to say false, something like that. It's not, there's no connection between whether there was connection or not, if that's the expectation that the consumer has, right? There's a lot of facets, and like, I don't think that the requirement to have like full coverage of every possible facet in spec is required.
Right,
It's
so
just
you might...
I think it's more about expectations that the consumer has.
So consumer can declare, I don't care, as you said, right? I don't read this particular value.
But this would be in the
something else with it, right?
Right. This would be in the consumer part of it, though. I think I put this in the wrong place, right? If we're talking about the test scenarios themselves, right? They're
containing a list of events with facets. So those are consumer tests.
Right. And an MD file to explain the semantics, but the semantics are just the human readable explanation of the test for the test scenario itself, I think. Because the folder that contains the consumer test environment configurations is probably the one that has the semantic explanations that we're talking about. With the expectation of response, right?
I think the expectations are per test, right? Rather than per global consumer environment.
It's per consumer per test. So I think that's where I struggle with it, right? Because
I mean, so there are two things. Okay, there are two things. First is what we're trying to describe in these events, right? And this is like a description of a test itself. And second is description what the actual consumer wants to do with that information. So one example, right, is a test that describes column level lineage between two tables. And that's one description, right? We have some series of events. Those events describe this column level lineage. And second is like the consumer implementing this test can say that I don't care about column level lineage. My response will be only about table level lineage.
Right, and so that's the expectation of response, right?
Yes.
The expectation is that column level lineage would be 0 out of 5 cases, right? Or that none of these would react, and that's fine. So that it won't look like you failed the test because you expected to fail the test.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
But I think maybe we can, Sheeri, maybe we can look at the example that I wrote in the other comment thread there, how this interface would look like. Yeah, it's probably there. So because Maciek, you're still generally aligned with that proposal, but you're saying that we should allow for the consumer to return, I don't know, some value that declares, yes, we did something with it, but don't care for this test.
I'm saying that I think your interface assumes some global expectations that given the test, the consumer should report whether like connection between those two fields is retained. I think the consumer should define what their expectation is.
Okay.
So
yes, right. So,
rather than prescribing what the consumer should do, I think they should do it.
That's interesting. So then it would be still sort of generic. We would need to have in our test harness the possibility for consumer vendors to put in those expectations per test scenario. And then
yeah. I mean, in your case, they would need to put add some code, contribute some code that actually, because you still need to, like, there is a producer API, the contract between producers and consumers, but all the different data catalogs, governance tools that you represent have different front-end APIs, right? That allow you to get this information. So this is still like consumer defined.
Right. So we just need a place where we can allow consumers to define those expectations per test scenario, right?
Yes.
Right. That's what I was trying to figure out here. So I just kind of wrote per consumer. And so I don't know if that's like a folder within each test scenario of all the consumers or what.
A good question. I think though there's two parts to this here. I think you also proposed this this mapping file to describe the mapping from OpenLineage fields into the consumer API, which also has to live somewhere. And then the other topic we just discussed is actually implementation, right?
Like, what does the file look like, you mean?
No, I mean, so that the file, I mean, the file might end up actually at it might go into the registry.
So here's what I'm going to do. I am just going to, I'm not going to specify where in the implementation it is, right? We can, those details can be worked out. So for each test scenario, a consumer can note their expectation of response, and then can note their mapping.
And how to actually, I think this needs to be a code, right? How to get this, because there's no possibly one method that you can get all this information. Or maybe it is, but I don't know how all of those APIs work, right? So if you have an API that, for example, you have a test that checks table level lineage compatibility, it might be that you have one API endpoint that you have to hit to get the response. But if you want to check column level lineage or schema of some table or something else, then you have to hit some other endpoint. And maybe there's a test that checks like compatibility, like lineage between multiple tables, right? So you might need multiple API hits. So all of those tests would need to be called from consumer point of view, rather than like YAML mapping or JSON mapping or something like this. At least that's what I believe if we were going to test some advanced use cases.
So are you saying it's too complex, or are you saying that we should amend this to add that complexity?
I think it's too complex to have it as like simple mapping, right? I think it's like series of instructions how to get this information from consumer system.
So it has to be the consumer vendors who implement those checks, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think in most cases it's not very much complex type of tests, right? It requires knowledge about the system.
Right. Tested. I mean, this is more this, right? The test environment configuration, right? It's not just, oh, use HTTP and here's the API URL, right? There might be several API URLs.
Yes, there might, I mean, API key or something like this should be here, of course, and like particular endpoint, but then how to actually get data for some particular test might be something else, right? So that's why I think the interface idea was really good. Just I think it's
so I see. Test scenarios may include how to retrieve information for the tests. If they are complex. Is this, am I getting this correct?
I think this is per consumer, right?
I would remove it here, Sheeri, because I think I would
Okay.
what I would do is I would move this sentence here into that
Yeah.
folder. And maybe
Okay.
it lives there or in some associated
Something
folder
like that.
per consumer.
And what about this one with the test scenario? All three of these? Let's see. Let me do
No, I
this.
think the
You need to tell me if it's right
so
or
this
wrong.
this one I would put into this whole thing here into the registry actually, because it's invariant of the specific scenario, etc.
This last one for each test scenario.
Yeah, might actually be better. Yeah, this mapping file, right? That's what it's about. I would put that in the registry.
So that's this. I mean, this is all the registry, right?
No, I don't know. No, I think this is more like I don't know.
Oh,
what
you're
that's
talking
mean.
about the custom facet registry?
Yeah, exactly.
But it might not just be for custom facets. Right? So for example, you know, an SQL transformation, right? There's the SQL code is in, it's part of the standard metadata in job, right? There's an SQL thing. But people might want to know, hey, does Calibra show that information anywhere? Or does it just, you know, accept it and then throw it away?
How do we define this Noji in this registry? Is it a consumer registry or a facet registry? Because if it's a consumer registry, then I would put this part there. If it's only about facets, and
so in the registry we have the I guess two pieces, right? Like, so there's for the producer, you can publish your custom facet schemas and examples. And for the consumers, I think we put there the list of facet you understand, right? Like, and for now it's a bit, we didn't put much information there, but I think as we make progress, we can enrich what's in the registry. But in the registry, we have some space for the consumers to put more information about what they understand. So I think we could expand there.
I think we can figure this out.
Yeah, we can do that. So then the last point in the last 4 minutes, we talked about, you know, reporting response code. That's fine. But then we talked about consumers doing real-time ingestion, and then how would producers use it, right? Like, how would we automatically collect compatibility of producers? And so we were talking about test harnesses, right? And that's when we got into, like Jens was saying, running it as a GitHub workflow to catch regressions early, right? And that was something where I was like, oh, we're not talking about consumers or producers, right? Now we're talking about OpenLineage, right? Kind of administrators or someone who's adding something new to the spec. And so then we started talking about this interface here.
And that's the discussion we just had with Maciek. So
Right.
Maciek should look a bit different.
So does that interface, is that a separate implementation detail about this interface?
Yeah, I think, Maciek, can we ask you to define in this file later on how you see this going? Because I think you have a good idea, and I think it sounds good.
Yeah, I think it's good. I'm just not sure where to put it. So, because I think we all kind of agreed on everything here, but we need to make sure that we get all the details in here.
I will update the doc later, but I think we are mostly on the same page. It's just that we need to express it in an understandable way, right, for everyone.
Yes. Yes. Great. I think that's all that we have to talk about today. And if anyone has any comments, everybody can comment in the document if you have other use cases or implementation ideas. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheeri.
Thank you.